Okay, good morning, people. Peter, sorry about the late start. We just had a lockdown drill to take care of, so that's why we're a little bit late. But let's jump in. Nope, that was earlier. This is what we're doing. So, yesterday we were looking at a primary source by Winston Churchill, right? And we'll jump ahead here. It was a speech that he gave to a school. In October of 1941, and we kind of wanted to look at it and analyze it from the perspective of a primary source, right? What kind of things it was telling us and why it was telling us those things. And so, just as a quick review, what were some of the things that Winston Churchill was saying yesterday? What was Winston Churchill saying to, yeah?
To stay strong and they've been through a lot already, and now they're gonna fight back. Like they were weak before, but now they're strong.
Yeah, right. So he was kind of giving people hope, right? Telling them that they'd been through a lot. They were in a bad position before, but now things are looking up, right? And they're gonna fight it through, right? And you told me yesterday that he was trying to, I guess, inspire some hope in the British people, right? Some, show them that they'd been through a lot, but they were still here, and that they were going to persevere, right? He gave some advice to those school students, right? And that was, what was that kind of advice?
Never give up.
Yeah, right? Never give up, or never give in, right? There was kind of there was kind of a metaphor or a comparison between being bullied, right? And the idea that Hitler was a bully and he was bullying Europe and bullying Britain. And Winston Churchill was like, no, never give up, never give in, never, 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 right? Even if your enemy is much stronger than you, never give up, right? And so, yeah, that was kind of a powerful message, right? And one that probably the British people wanted or needed to hear, because as we saw, I don't have my map ready to go, but as we saw, the Nazis had been very successful either in allying with European nations or having some European nations neutral and then taking over the rest, right? They'd been really successful, and it was, at a certain time, it was really only Britain that was standing in their way, right? And so probably a scary time for Britain, but they'd come through it, they'd survived, they were armed, they had allies now, and they were looking forward to a victory, right? Or to the ability to sort of finish the job, right? So I showed you a little bit of Nazi propaganda yesterday. We said that, of course, propaganda is usually created by the government in order to get people to feel a certain way about things or believe a certain thing. And again, especially during wartime, all governments use propaganda. So it's not just the Nazis. The Western powers are using propaganda as well to try and get soldiers to sign up for war and fight against the evil Nazis, although, it's not a big stretch to say that they were evil, but again, Hitler's using it probably more and in kind of more diverse ways, right? And so we saw some propaganda that was meant to inspire people to see the Nazis as protectors, right? And of people who were taking care of the German people, but also they were like proud and noble and strong, right? And we saw that one of Hitler with the flag, leading all of those people, right? Those are kind of very heroic images of his. But there's different kind of propaganda as well, right? And so we saw this here of, the idea that the Jewish people are behind all of their enemies, right? And again, these kinds of images are very powerful, right? Because an argument is one thing, right? And we've talked about critical thinking, but that's a big deal, right? Okay, Ryan, sit down, and then I'm going to explain my 20-minute argument of why I think this. right? You don't want to sit and listen to me for 20 minutes, do you? No, you don't. But this communicates everything in a split second, right? Just by glancing at this image, you know what Hitler wants you to know, right? You quickly interpret it and you're like, oh, I get it, right? It's a much simpler way of communicating what you want people to know. And even if they're illiterate, right? Even if you're dealing with someone who doesn't know how to read, are they going to figure out this image? Yeah, right? So again, this is a very powerful way of persuading the public because, again, humans are such visual creatures, and you look at this and you get it, right? You don't have to have somebody explaining something to you for 20 minutes. It's not an argument, right? It's not something we can think critically about, bless you. It's a powerful image, right? As is this, right? This is a powerful image, a monstrous depiction of Jewish people, as is this, right? Sticks in the brain much better than a long, complicated argument, right? And again, Hitler's not trying to make a logical argument, right? He's not trying to convince you by logic and by rational standards. He's trying to appeal to your emotions, right? He wants you to feel fear, right? He wants you to feel suspicion, right? He wants you to feel revulsion and disgust, right? He wants you to feel all these things. And he's not worried about making a clear, proper argument to do it. He just wants you to feel this way. And so these images are very powerful. They're a powerful way of doing that. Okay? I would like you to read a few pages here. They're going to set us up to talk about the Holocaust, right? The genocide of mostly Jewish people, others as well, but mostly Jewish people during the Second World War. Okay, so a few pages for you to read, just a couple of questions for you to answer, and then we'll go ahead and talk about genocide. And I want to show you something else that's kind of not connected as well, but I'll look for that while you're reading. Okay. Actually, it probably is. Let me just check there. Yeah, I think you're right there, Regina. Yeah. That should be from page 127 to 131. Sorry about that. Thanks for catching that, though. Yeah. So, quick correction there. Page 127 to 131, and I think, is that in Microsoft Teams? Let me just double check. I feel like I put it there, but now I'm not sure. Text resources. Yes, it's there. Maybe just a couple more minutes there, guys? 2 or 3 more minutes? Okay, ready, people? Are we good? Are we not good? David's good. Avatej, you okay? Ryan, you ready? Yeah? Almost. Regina? Let's talk about the Battle of the Atlantic. Okay? What is this Battle of the Atlantic thing? What are we talking about? Right? So we're talking about the Atlantic Ocean, right? And there's a lot of goods coming, well, into Britain for the most part, right? Keep in mind that Britain is an island, right? And so if you don't bring it there, you won't find it there, right? And so Britain has to come up with massive resources during the war, and of course, who's helping them out? Who's supplying them? What's that? Yeah, America, the U.S., and Canada a little bit too. But yeah, North America is heavily supplying Britain, right? So They're sending across ship after ship filled with food and weapons and raw materials and all the things that the British might need. But of course, what are the Germans doing at the same time?
They are blocking roads.
Blocking and
Sinking.
yeah, the Germans are out there with their submarines sinking all of these ships, right? Because what do the Germans know? Or what's their strategy here?
That those who don't get any relevant information.
Yeah, right. That's the British main supply line. If you cut the supply line, if you cut them off from food and resources and weapons, they're done, right? They don't have enough food to last them indefinitely. If you cut off the supply line, wait 3 weeks, they're going to have to surrender, right? And so the Germans are working very hard in the Atlantic to try to sink as many ships as possible, right? And whereas, how are the Allies trying to keep this from happening? They're what? Yeah, so they're trying to destroy these submarines, right? Torpedoing them and so forth. What else are they doing? What's their other part of their strategy?
They're taking goods from Iran.
Okay, so other supply routes are part of it for sure. For sure, other supply routes. What else? They have a system. They have a system. And it starts with a C. I heard it. Yeah, there's a convoy system, right? So what are they doing? Well, they've got some ships that are carrying goods, and around it, they've got warships, right, which are escorting the supply ships. They're trying to shoot any or torpedo any submarines that might be around, and so they establish this convoy system. You're not just going to sail across the Atlantic on your own. You're going to go in a group, and you're going to be protected by warships around you, right? And this may not seem very exciting, and the Battle of the Atlantic is not one battle. It's actually goes on for the whole war. But it actually is a big deal, right? And Winston Churchill, I don't know if they quote him in here, but Winston Churchill said this is the most important battle of the war, right? We lose the Battle of the Atlantic, we lose the war, right? Because again, without supplies, without food, you're finished, right? And so Winston Churchill knows how important this is, and so even though, again, it's not one battle, it's kind of an ongoing thing, it's a critically important part of what's happening here, because again, if you cut the supply line, if you cut Britain off from food and resources, in a few weeks they'll have to surrender or starve to death, right? That's all they can do. Okay, so that brings us to the Holocaust, and I want to make a little bigger of a deal about the Holocaust than I normally do, because I was reading an article, I guess, a couple weeks ago, and it was basically saying that there's actually a big proportion of, I think, American and Canadian high school students who either don't know what the Holocaust is, and some of which think that it didn't happen, or that it wasn't as bad as it was made out to be. And to me, like personally, that's a big deal, right? For something so awful to have occurred to millions of people, and a short less than 100 years later, we're kind of in the process of forgetting about it, right? People are like, oh, I don't know what that is, or oh, that's not important, or was it really that bad? It's already, passing into, being forgotten, and I think that's a big problem, especially because, just the other day we were talking about how, can we learn any lessons from what happened in Europe to what's happening, say, between Russia and Ukraine right now? And I think we probably agreed that there was some comparability, right? That was somewhat similar. So again, we need to be able to remember and understand what happened before so we can understand what's happening now. And to forget something like that, is really to risk it happening again, right? And something like that cannot happen again, right? That's a one mistake, right? You let it happen once, but you can't go back there, right? And so the question I asked you here, or the question in the textbook, is what actually is the Holocaust? What are we talking about? Yeah.
Which includes the Jews,
Yeah.
Gypsies,
Yeah.
and some of the Slavs.
Hmm.
It's
Yeah.
I don't remember the answer.
No, that's okay. That's pretty good. Yeah, Avtash.
So it's like a genocide.
It is a genocide, right? And we'll get to the genocide thing in a few minutes. But yeah, it's the kind of organized extermination of an entire people, right? And again, most of those people are Jewish people, between 5 and 7 million, which is difficult to imagine, right? But there's some Slavic people in there from Eastern Europe. There are some Roma or some Gypsies in there. There are some gay men in there. There are people with physical and mental disabilities in there. All of them are, as the textbook explained, all of those people are seen as subhumans, right? They're not humans. They're less than human, right? And pretty quickly, they are first sent to camps where the Nazis start working them to death, and when that's not fast enough, they actually set up a series of camps that are just meant to murder them, right? People are rounded up in the middle of the night, put into a train car, sent off to a camp, and they die there, right? That's all that kind of needs to be said about that. And it's hard to imagine the numbers too, right? Like, there's, in the lower mainland here, there's 2.5 million people, give or take. So Vancouver and Burnaby and Coquitlam and North Van and all of those places, I think it's about 2.5 million. So double it. Every single person in this area, twice over, is executed, right? And as you read about, in very brutal ways, right? Yeah, so let me just see what I have here. Yeah, so this is kind of, as Avitej mentioned, this is a genocide. And this is what we're talking about when we talk about genocide. We're talking about something that I'm jumping ahead here, but this is something that came out of the Holocaust itself, okay? Because after the war is over, when the Allies come into Germany, they discover some of these camps, and I think, from what I know, I think they had some idea that these camps existed, but they didn't quite know how bad they actually were. And so I think particularly for Allied soldiers, it was kind of a shock to come across some of these camps. And so after the war, the United Nations sat down and tried to come up with an official definition for genocide, right? For a war crime where you do this, right? Where you systematically harm or kill members of a certain group, or if you impose living conditions that bring about their destruction, or if you prevent births, or if you take their children and raise them in another group, right? Whatever you do, if you do one of these or some of these or all of these, you're trying to bring about the end of a particular group of people, right? And that's genocide. Of course, here in Nazi Germany, it's mostly the first one, right? There's mostly a systematic killing of people. But all of these things are considered genocide. They're all part of that equation. And so I'd like to dig into this a little more, but maybe what we'll do is we'll take a break and then we'll come back and look into this with a little more depth, okay? So yeah, let's take a break. All right. All good? What's up? Okay. All right. So we're kind of dealing with the Holocaust here. We're dealing with genocide. And as I told you, after the Holocaust occurred and after Germany was kind of captured by the Allies, they came across the evidence that this thing had occurred. And so the United Nations sat down and kind of created an official definition for what genocide is, and talked about how it works as well. And so why I kind of wanted to, talk about this in a little more detail is the first part, what I told you that, it feels like people are actually starting to forget about the Holocaust, or even worse, feel that it happened, but it wasn't so bad, right? But in fact, it was bad, right? It was the worst of human behavior that you can imagine, right? And the other thing I wanted to kind of bring to your attention here is that the Holocaust is not really the first genocide that humans have accomplished, but it's not the last either, right? If you look here, between 1956, so that's after World War II, and 2016, an estimated 43 genocides took place. So the Holocaust is certainly probably the most popular genocide, right? It's the one that we think of immediately, but it's far from the only one, right? And so millions and millions of people have died as the result of genocide since that time. So again, have we learned the lesson of history? Well, hard to say, right? So what I have a short thing for you to read, and it's called The 8 Stages of Genocide, because what's important to know about genocide is that it has happened before. It happened before the Holocaust. It has definitely happened since the Holocaust. But maybe more importantly is that genocides are not accidents, okay? They don't just happen, right? They don't just come out of nowhere. They actually are very, very predictable, okay? There are stages that societies pass through on the way to a genocide. And so if you're paying attention, you can see society moving in this direction and hopefully make changes to stop it from happening, right? And that's an important thing, right? If you're talking about learning the lessons of history, which we're supposed to be doing, this is what you want to do, right? You want to, if something awful is happening, oh gosh, how can we stop this from happening again? Well, let's actually study how these things occur, so that when we see them, we're like, oh, that's an alarm bell, right? That's a red flag. We gotta put a stop to this, right? Because we know where it leads, right? Again, genocides aren't accidents, and they don't just happen out of nowhere, right? They're very carefully planned, and it takes a while to move from basically stage 1 to the place where people are being injured or killed, right? So I have this article. It's in Microsoft Teams. It's in readings, and there's 4 questions here. Okay, so I want you to pay attention to each stage and see if you can come up with just one example of how that stage occurred in Nazi Germany. Okay, some of it might be things we've read about. Some of the things might be things you know about from before. Okay. Yeah. These are kind of extra questions that I would like you to think about. Yeah. Start with number 1, and then we'll deal with 2, 3, and 4 after, okay? So just read the article, identify those 8 stages, and see if you can come up with how each stage kind of appeared in Nazi Germany, okay? All right, let's do it. Readings, 8 Stages of Genocide. couple more minutes and then we'll talk, okay? Okay, guys. So, as you can see here, the authors of this paper, who are members of Genocide Watch, they're kind of making the case that genocides are not accidental, right? They don't just happen out of nowhere. There's kind of a long process, right? And there's 8 stages. What's the first stage? So, Avitaj, what's the first stage?
Classification.
Okay, and what does that kind of mean?
To classify someone from a certain culture or something. So, like for example, what happened in Rwanda.
Okay.
The Tutsis and the Tutsis. So, I think the Tutsis were seen as the black people.
They were. Shoot, I always mix this up, and I should know this. The story of I know the story of Rwanda. It's kind of a long story, but maybe we'll come back to Rwanda in a second. But yeah, the idea here is that you have different groups in society that you identify, right? And I think most countries are like this. We have countries that are a little bit multicultural or a lot multicultural. Maybe you have different religions. Maybe you have different tribes, different races or ethnicities, different religions. Most countries have a mix of people, right? And so, yeah, we identify each other's differently because we're the member of different groups. Again, pretty much all societies are like that, right? What's number 2? Symbolization. What does that mean, Regina? Yeah, there's some sort of symbolic identifier of each group, right? And again, that has a lot to do with, many societies have this, right? Where we found ways to symbolize different groups of people, right? So the first one, classification, is probably true of Nazi Germany, all right, or Germany itself, because Germany was a multicultural country, right? There was lots of Germans there, but there was lots of Jewish people. There were some Polish people. There were Roma or Gypsies, people from other Slavic countries, people from Czechoslovakia and Austrians, and there's all kinds of different people within Germany, right? Here we have symbolization. That kind of starts with the Nazi symbol, right? The Nazis kind of give themselves a symbol, but then they give symbols to other people, right? What kind of symbols are used in Nazi Germany to identify others? The what? Yeah, the Star of David, right? And what's interesting is that the Jewish people are made to wear this star, so they don't wear it because they want to. They wear it because they have to, right? And again, think about the function of that, right? We're singling them out as different, right? We're labeling them, you're something else, right? You're different. And we're putting that label on them, right? Now, the last one we'll talk about here today is dehumanization. What does that mean?
When they don't like or they don't want another group of people,
Yeah.
they just want to be them. No one
Yeah. So, so people, so the group in power just wants it to be them, right? And so, what do they do to the others? How do they?
Kill them.
What's that?
To kill them.
Yeah, but not yet.
So,
You got to wait till stage 7.
Like hate speeches.
They what?
They do hate speeches and propaganda.
Yeah, there's propaganda, there's hate speeches, and the point of this is to make these people less than human, right? Because again, you may disagree with me on this, but the idea is that human beings, normal human beings, don't really like to kill other people, right? We kind of have a block against that, right? So how do you get people to go along with it? Well, you dehumanize them, right? You make them seem less than human, and then it becomes easier to treat them poorly, right? And it becomes easier to kill them. Oftentimes you'll see this in movies where you have to do a big battle scene. If you see a bunch of humans being killed, it's kind of heavy, it's kind of intense, right? But if you look at Avengers Infinity War, what are the Avengers fighting when they're in Wakanda? Yeah, it's those creatures, right, with all those arms or whatever it is, right? They're not human, right? They've been dehumanized. If you look at Star Wars, who are the heroes usually shooting at? Stormtroopers, right? Which are human, but they're all wearing helmets and they all look the same, right? So you kind of, they're not quite so human, right? They're kind of faceless in a way, right? If you go back to the earlier Star Wars movies, you'll see that they're shooting robots, right? Which is even more dehumanized, because robots are easy to kill and nobody cares, right? But killing humans is a different thing, right? But killing creatures is a different thing too, right? It's easier to watch that. And so prior to a genocide, you'll see people starting to dehumanize the other group, right? They're like rats, they're like lice, they're vermin, they're pests, they're a disease on society, right? All of these things are meant to make them seem less than human. And we saw in those propaganda images from Nazi Germany, that's exactly what's happening, right? The Jews were lice, right? Or they were these eternal monsters, right? So whether you make them like, pests or vermin, or whether you make them like supernatural monsters, you're making them not human, right? You're making them into something else. And again, it becomes much easier for people to go along with treating them poorly, or ultimately with killing them if you don't see them as human beings, if you see them as less, right? So this kind of classification and symbolization, we do see a lot of that, definitely classification, but even some symbolization in many of our societies. But you should definitely, the alarm bells should start to ring when you see people being dehumanized, right? Because that's trouble, right? Now you're starting to see a certain group as less than human, and then it becomes easier to treat them poorly. Okay. Now, I want to press pause on this because I just want to show you something, because it's something that's happening kind of right now in the news. And so I don't know if you since read, but Avatej, I think you and I talked briefly, but there's this kind of protest going on in Ottawa, right? And so have you heard of this? A little bit? Regina, nod. David, no? Ryan? No? It seemed like what it was some people who drove big trucks didn't like the fact that the federal government was requiring them to be vaccinated. And so what they were going to do is drive all the way across Canada to Ottawa, show up at the House of Parliament, and protest. It seemed like that's what it was going to be. But as time went on, it seemed that it wasn't really about truckers. It was kind of about everything. And so it was about people who were tired of COVID. It was people who didn't like vaccines. It was people who didn't like Justin Trudeau. It was people who felt that the government was restricting them too much. It was, right-wing people who were kind of white supremacists were mixed into there as well. It just became this collection of people and issues, and nobody was really sure what it was about. Anyway, a bunch of trucks rolled into Ottawa. They set up in front of the Parliament buildings. They, some people committed crimes. They set off fireworks. They were there. They're still there now, a week and a half later. And I just wanted to show you something that's starting to come out of this now. And so, again, initially it looked like it was going to be about truckers and vaccines, right? That's what it seemed to be about. But now it seems to be about more. So I want to show you this, first of all. This is something that the people who organized this protest, this is a document they created, okay? And so it looks and sounds very legally, okay? So if you read it all, and I'm not going to ask you to, but if you read it all, you would probably say, wow, that sounds very official, right? Because it's written in kind of official kind of language. It sounds very powerful, sounds very real. But I want to direct your attention here to, sorry, I got to do it here, to this paragraph. Whoops, no, I can't highlight it very well. Let me see. No, it's not going to let me. To this paragraph, starting here, okay? So what are they asking for? Well, they say that where did it go? Where did it go? Did I lose it? Hang on. Yeah. So here, they want to get the Senate and the Governor General of Canada to, they want the government, so Justin Trudeau and his Liberals, to resign their lawful positions of authority immediately. And then these trucker guys want to form a committee with the Senate and the Governor General to do all of these things. Okay? So here's their memorandum. And they want everyone who was fired because they didn't get vaccinated, they want them all to get their jobs back. Anyone who got a fine, oops, I should go over here. Anyone who got a fine, they want those fines refunded, and blah, 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 blah. But what they're talking about here is something kind of concerning, okay? And here, this is from a press conference yesterday. I think it's a press conference yesterday. This dude here in the gray is one of the organizers of this whole thing. But I want you to listen to what he has to say and what he's proposing to do, or what he would like to have happen. Okay? I just want you to listen to what he says. Oh, sorry, I got to do it here, not there. Listen to what he says.
Until the job is done. Okay? I am not calling for violence. I'm not expecting you to get into your vehicle, drive here, and create problems, create crimes. That's not what we're saying. Strengthen numbers. We got sent here to send a message. The message isn't getting through. He's not getting it. And I apologize if I'm bashing the guy, but honestly...
He's talking about Justin Trudeau, by the way. Okay.
My assessment, he's got a 22 caliber mind and a 357 Wolf. Okay? Let's get to the table, for God's sakes. Enough hiding. I'm willing to sit at a table with the Conservatives and the NDP in a bloc as a coalition. I'll sit with the Governor General. You put us at the table with somebody that actually cares about him. You know, and a note on that, there's no more Mr. O'Toole.
Okay, that's enough. That's enough of that dude. Now, what's he actually saying? Right? He and his friends have rolled into Ottawa with all their trucks. They honked their horns and disturbed everybody and, set off fireworks and, made a big fuss. And now they're asking the Governor General to make Justin Trudeau and his government resign. And then this guy wants to sit around the table with all the other political parties and the Governor General and do things, make decisions. That's an overthrow of the government, right? Remember when we talked about Hitler's Nazis tried to, in Munich, right? There was the beer hall putsch. They tried to overthrow the government, failed, Hitler went to jail, right? But isn't that what this guy is asking for? Isn't he trying to overthrow the government so he can do what he wants? Like, this is insane, right? But there's people who are actually, like, he's sitting there in front of news cameras saying this for real, right? Like, he's not joking, right? It's not all a bit. He's actually serious about this. And of course, he has no hope of being successful, right? But it's ridiculous. Like the entire thing, even though that thing I showed you looks very official, it's bananas, right? It's bizarre. But this is worth paying attention to, is it not? Because this guy is showing up on the doorstep of our democracy, demanding that our democratically elected government quit so that he and his people can get in and kind of do what they want. That's an overthrow of the government, right? And those guys raised about $10 million through GoFundMe. And so the other question is, where's that money coming from? I don't think it's coming from Canada. It's coming from somewhere else. So there's other people, maybe in the United States, who are very interested in pumping millions of dollars into people who want to overthrow our government. Right? And the whole thing sounds insane. And in a certain way it is. But in a certain way it's also not. Right? These guys are not very well organized and they don't really know what they're doing. They can't get their $10 million because GoFundMe decided that it was against their rules and regulations, and so these guys don't really get any of their money. But they'll find a way to get it again. And, what can a group of people like this accomplish with a little extra planning and $10 million? Right? Can they actually get in the way of our democracy? Can they overthrow our state? Right? They seem to have paralyzed the city of Ottawa for at least a week, right? What's next, right? And again, it's insane. I can't believe we're talking about this, but yeah, that's unbelievable. He's talking about overthrowing the Canadian government so that he and his small group can do what they want, right? And again, I'm not comparing him to Hitler because he's not, but there's always someone who wants to step in and take over, right? There's always someone who will want to take away people's democracy and their right to decide for themselves. And if we give it to them, they'll take it, right? If we let this kind of thing happen, people will take our democracy from us. They'll be only too happy to, right? Because what this guy's talking about, Tom, whatever his name is, that's not democracy, right? When you show up with big machines and you blockade the House of Parliament and then you demand that the government step down so that you can make the decisions, that's not democracy, right? That's a coup, right? That's a putsch. That's an overthrow of the state. It's not going to happen this time, but again, this is something we should pay attention to. And again, people who were sympathetic to these guys were demonstrating right outside this building on Saturday, right? Did you see it? Were you here, or did you just see it on Twitter or something? On TV?
Yeah, on the news.
Yeah. So it's happening literally right outside our door, this kind of stuff. And so, again, it's worth watching the news, right? Because this stuff is happening, and again, in some ways it's happening again, right? We have people who would like to overthrow the state if we let them. And again, no fan of Justin Trudeau, really. I don't really like the guy very much, but he was elected. And so, yeah, we can't have people overthrowing the state. Anyway, that's all the time we have. I'm sorry I went over. I just wanted to show you that because it's happening at the moment. Don't forget there's no school tomorrow, so enjoy, sleep in, relax, enjoy yourselves. I'll be working hard. You can laugh at me and go, ha ha, poor Mike, he's got to work.